Good afternoon. I am Diana Arias with the Community Technical Assistance Center at NYU Silver School of Social Work, Silver's Institute, and I would like to welcome you to today's presentation in collaboration with Families Together of New York State, titled Supporting Survivors, Family Peer Advocates, Working with Survivors of Intimate Partner or Domestic Violence. So family peer advocates often work with families who are in difficult situations. Today's webinar will help FPAs understand the fundamentals of domestic violence and intimate partner violence and the impacts exposure to these may have on children and families. Strategies to engage with survivors that center their experience and promote ongoing discussion around safety and support will be explored. Additionally, given the unique role of FPAs, the importance of self-care as an integral part in this work will be highlighted. Today's webinar is presented by our CTAC consultant, Nicole Lee from Private Emotional Health, and the Senior Director of Training and Workforce Development at Families Together, Carrie Ann Rollier. Before we get started, I just want to orient everyone to the Zoom system. You have been placed on mute just to avoid any background noises. If you come across any technical issues during today's event, please chat to our host who will be able to assist you. You can submit questions at any point in time throughout this presentation via the chat box, and we'll attend to them either in the moment or for the Q&A portion. But again, just really highlighting and encouraging you to share your informations or your questions. And at the end of the presentation, you will see a survey that will pop up. We ask that you take a minute just to fill that out because it really does inform our future offerings. So any feedback or suggestions that you might have on these topics is ideal and would be greatly appreciated. And then lastly, the recording and slides for today's event will be posted on our CTAG website within 2 to 3 business days, along with the resource created by today's presenters. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our presenters, Nicole Lee and Carrie Ann Rollier, to get us started. Welcome all.
Thank you so much, Diana. Good to see all of this representation from New York State. My name is Nicole Lee, pronouns she, her, hers. I'm a clinician in New York City, and I'm very, very excited to be here and discussing what we have prepared for you all today. So first, we're going to go over our agenda. We have just about an hour and a half protected together. Here's our essential run of show. We're going to be talking about best practices, really grounded in empathy, respect, and bias awareness. We're going to touch on some self-care, really modeling how y'all in this space can practice self-care and make plans for self-care practice in the future. We're going to discuss how DV and IPV, which we're going to be using as abbreviations of domestic violence and intimate partner violence, have an impact on children. And we really want to be able to give you all ways to support and intervene with the families that you are connecting with, and also want to touch on what y'all should consider in terms of imminent danger when and if that comes across your work. And then we're going to close out with another self-care break, sharing out of some resources, and ample time of questions and answer section. We also want to encourage this to be as much of an interactive exchange as possible. Carrie Ann and I would love to hear live questions, live feedback as we're moving through. We are not robots, we're people in the work, and we love hearing from you all about how the work is looking for you and how this is resonating. And just to summarize the goals, we're going to provide baseline best practices and how to support survivors of IPV and DV. We're going to demonstrate the prevalence of IPV and DV and how it can impact kids and families, and we want to share supports for you all to consider. This webinar actually came out of a tool that Carrie Ann and I developed. Y'all should have received this tool ahead of this presentation, ahead of this webinar, and it will be available after with the recording as well. But you're going to see a mirror image of a lot of what we're talking about reflected in that tool, and we hope you find it to be helpful. Carrie Ann and I took a lot of time to develop it and get a lot of feedback, and we're really excited that it is existing and out in the world for you all to use. All right, moving along, I think I will now pass it to Carrie Ann.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. So welcome, everybody. So glad that you're able to join us today. Like Nicole said, we've worked really hard and long on this, and we're both very passionate about this topic. So my name is Carrie Ann Rollier. I am the Director of Training and Workforce Development at Families Together in New York State. And we'd like to start with something interactive with you guys. So if you could chat into the box, what brings you to the webinar today? Why was this of interest to you? We'd really interested to know that.
Yes, please. If you can chat in, and we did just get a comment. So I don't know if our coordinator Vanessa, it seems that maybe just participants are only allowed or only able to chat in to the hosts and panelists.
I'm seeing that also, Diana. We can read out while y'all are chatting in for the time being. So we see some folks with general interest in working with couples. All right, now everyone should be, there we go. Lenore's in. All right, Lenore, you have life experience and clients who are victims. We've got a psychologist looking to expand your lens. Oh my gosh, flooding with responses. Thank you all so much. Learning new ways to help families. We've got representation here from lived experience, child therapists, clients that are victims of our survivors, family work. Amazing learning opportunities. Sorry, I'm whizzing through
That's
it.
great.
Jump in. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Amazing. Witnessed DV, IPV, working with families.
Learning and
SPOA.
growing. Love that.
Love that. Yeah. Thank you for those child SPOA workers out there. Appreciate your work. And child welfare, student learning, student interning. Hello, intern. Happy to have you.
And I'm also saying, and I think in the context of time, also an increase in DV after COVID, right? So after COVID, and I'm sure also during COVID, so you might be seeing an increase in the folks that you work. So I appreciate that context.
Yeah, absolutely. DV and IPV took a nuanced shape and form with COVID and are having to be locked down, locked in together. And we saw that have lots of impact on survivors and families dealing with that. So thank you for raising that.
Somebody from Family Justice Center. Welcome. Thank you. It's awesome.
Love steps to end family violence. Great work there. Amazing. Okay. All right. Well, we are so excited for all y'all have shared. I'm going to move us to the next slide if you're cool with that, Carrie Ann.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. So in the context of all the information we're going to be sharing and best practices that we've drawn up as sort of like baseline recommendations, we want you all to be thinking about Janet. Imagine you are working with her. She is seeking support for her 8-year-old son, James, who is having some school challenges. You've been working with her for a few months, and after some time working together, she tells you that she's hoping to move soon, which led to a conversation about where and why. At that time, she eventually was able, or eventually, maybe not at that time, eventually she was able to tell you that she is trying to go into a shelter to seek safety from her partner. So want you to kind of put yourself in that position, think about what would come up for you as you're learning about Janet's situation. And we're going to kind of bring Janet into the picture as we're talking about best practices and moving through some of the considerations that we've drawn up here. All right, so our next section is on best practices. So we want to start with a framework of really respecting and believing the survivor that is sought out work with you and whatever your role may be. This training and the tool we developed is really focused on family peer advocates, but we know a lot of this transcends roles and responsibilities, and these recommendations can really be considered in a lot of spaces and a lot of roles. So we want to start by saying that we really want to encourage you all to encourage the survivor that you're working with to not be blamed for their situation that they're in or any situation that they've experienced. We want to really center their story and trust that what they're sharing with you is their truth. And actively listen to what they're sharing with you. So sometimes in our work, we have our reactions that come up and our thoughts and our immediate reference points from our own experience. And we might have, lived experience with some of the same things that folks that we are serving are dealing with. And what we want to recommend to you all is a consideration to ask for permission before sharing your own experiences and really thoughtfully share experiences that relate to what that individual is experiencing with the intention to promote empowerment. So sometimes we have gut reactions and think, oh, I've been there. I know how I could provide some context or some strategies that might help. We want to suggest that maybe you ask for permission in the first place and then really be rooted in how can what you're sharing influence and impact more of an empowerment stance in the work and what they're working through. And Denise, I love that comment. They know their story better than we do. Exactly. We're going to get to more of that, and that's exactly where we wanted to start. So thank you for raising that up. All right, I'll move us to the next slide for Carrie. And oh, I might have skipped one. Sorry. There we go.
Got it.
There you go.
All right. So as we are working with these survivors, you want to make sure that you are in a situation where you are acknowledging that they are those experts in their situation, in their safety, and they know what is best for them. So there are some very dangerous times for survivors and for the children who live with them or who are around the perpetrator or the survivor. So we want to talk about that a little bit. So on average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. During 1 year, that is 10 million women and men. So that's a pretty, harrowing statistic there. So with all of those women and men, on average, a survivor plans to either end the relationship or actually leaves the relationship 7 to 12 times before that relationship is ended permanently. So sometimes you hear, why don't they just leave? Why did they go back? What we're going to be talking about and what's on the tool gives you a little bit of a perspective as to why that happens. 75% of domestic violence related homicides occur upon separation. And there's a 75% increase of violence for up to 2 years after separation. So it's not just that immediate leaving time that's dangerous. The danger zone is really 2 years. And for some people, it can be longer. It can be much, much longer for some people, but on average, that real hot danger zone is 2 years from the time where they say I'm leaving. And that is a lot of times why survivors go back or they don't leave when they really desperately want to. It's literally a matter of life and death for them and possibly for their children and loved ones around them. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Carrie Ann. I'm seeing some comments as well sent to us, and feel free to reply to everyone if you all would like to. It's also fine to just send it to hosts and panelists. I want to raise up a recommendation that Albert shared around asking about, so I'm thinking you're talking about Janet, but asking about her time frame to be ready to go into the shelter. So this is centering what she knows, right? She knows what her situation is. She knows what might be an option in making that escape plan. And you centered respecting her schedule and have resources ready immediately. And you're already getting to so much of what we've outlined in the tool. So thank you for sharing that. Our next section in respecting and believing the survivor is really wanting to emphasize that your role as a family peer advocate, or whatever role you may be fulfilling, and we see a lot of representation here, we want to make sure that we are clear that there's a separation from our idea of rescuing a survivor versus advocating and empowering a survivor and their family and their loved ones. So we want to make sure that what we're suggesting and providing as support is framed without this kind of assumption of getting them out of their situation because we know best, but rather respecting that they know best, as Diana said earlier, and that they're the experts of their situation. And going back to what Carrie Ann was talking about in terms of hot zones, of really high risk, high danger zones, in terms of violence that can be more likely to be perpetrated, we wanted to ask and get your feedback. Are you all familiar with the cycle of violence and the power control wheel? If you can just chat in like yes or no. Okay, I'm seeing some no's. I'm seeing a little bit more yeses come in. Okay, beautiful. Okay, so no's a lot. All right, so I'm going to move I'm going to mention this next. A lot of no's. Okay, mixed bag here. Okay, excellent. Thank you for that feedback. We want to just raise up really quickly before we look at the visuals of the cycle of violence and the power and control wheel. We want to encourage you all to always involve other professionals when needed. You're not alone in this work. We're all on teams for many reasons, and one of that is so that you're not alone in having to make decisions on what your next best step is in supporting any individual in a violent or dangerous situation. So we'll get into more of that down the line as well, but wanting to make sure we emphasize that, ask for support when needed, go to your supervisor, go to your team, and raise up what your concerns are around safety, because our number one job is making sure children in these situations are safe and adults as well. All right, so we're going to look at the visual of the cycle of violence. We're not going to spend a ton of time going into this theory, but we wanted to at least have y'all's eyes on it so that you can see some of the statistics that Carrie Ann referenced earlier reflected in what these kind of attempts to leave, what calming phase look like, what tension phase, how buildup happens into a crisis phase, and how that can manifest. This is not a one size fits all. Not everyone, there are people who may attempt to leave less times than 7 or more times than 12 before they actually leave for the last time. But this gives an idea based on the research that's been done around what these cycles look like. So really thinking about a calming time. Sometimes this is called like the honeymoon phase, where you are, the person who is maybe perpetrating the violence is really on their best behavior and not, not perpetrating some of the more severe ways of imbalance of power and control, a little bit of a buildup into tension. Maybe the survivor is talking about being more cautious or having to walk on eggshells or having a heightened state of anxiety or worry out of fear of, upsetting their partner or the alleged perpetrator. And then crisis phase, when there's an eruption, really that's when you might actually see violence take place. You might see destruction of property. Survivor may articulate fear. They may be able to say they're more concerned about their child's safety before they can talk about concern of their own safety. And so having a familiarity around the cycle of violence can help you as you're doing work with anyone. We can think about Janet, pick up on clues of maybe there's some cycle at play here. And then I'm going to move to the power and control wheel next. Yep, there we go. So this breaks down the different types of power and control imbalance that can be enacted by a perpetrator. Again, not a one size fits all, but a really helpful tool on illustrating how some of these tactics are actually enacted. I want to also mention that this does mention using male privilege. We want to heighten and emphasize that their assumptions around all women being survivors or men being perpetrators is categorically false. We know that men are equally likely to be victims as are women. And so we want to challenge that, but also respect that this tool can provide some context and some language around how power and control imbalance comes to life in a domestic violent or intimate partner violent situation. And I see Chris mentioned you have experience of professional partners not believing the family, peer advocate, or survivor of the degree of risk. Any suggestions? Yeah, that's a tough situation where there's a distrust or a doubting of genuine accounts of violence. And I think in those situations, what I would recommend is involving other professional partners who might be able to strengthen the consensus that this is something of concern and to be really taken seriously. And I would use some of the same language we've been using in the prior slides around a survivor's account is what we need to center and trust. That's their experience, is their truth, and we need to go off of what they've so willingly and openly shared with us as witnesses to what they're experiencing, and try to center the survivor as the truth holder and what is needed and what level of attention should be given. I'm curious, Carrie Ann, if you have any other thoughts on that question in particular before we move on.
the answers in my head was exactly what you had said. So I agree with everything wholeheartedly. Using that language, even maybe showing some statistics or sending some material, say this is where this is coming from. It's not just me saying that this is true. This is the scientifically proven statistics and information around this topic. If that person is willing to read that, I would recommend that as well.
A great idea. Yeah.
Mhm.
And data points or evidence that, and some you can pull from a lot of the resources we've plugged in here too, from the New York State and other resources that are highly respected. And Denise, I'm seeing your question. So he should just be ready to help her when she is ready to go. I think, that definition of ready, it looks different depending on your role, and what is appropriate in terms of what being like, how to support an individual and what their action, what they're trying to action on. But yes, no matter how long it takes, it may take a long time before someone's ready to take action and change, make an attempt to leave. It takes a lot of planning and a lot of partnership in bearing witness to what they're experiencing to really gain the strength to act on that when they're ready to. So I think, yes, no matter how long it takes, remain ready and remain open to strategizing and partnering with the survivor.
And I'll add, be mindful of your role in that person's life. If you are in the role of an FPA, physically helping that parent to move or to leave a situation, maybe out of the scope of practice, but there are resources and other professionals that you can connect them with and even go to meet with for the first time if that is something that is necessary for that parent. So be mindful of your role in that person's life. You may come across this in your own personal life where you have a more active role. But when you are working in a professional role, just be mindful of what is and is not in your scope of practice.
Great plug, Carrie Ann. Thank you. I see your comment, Joanna. I'll try to open that up in the time. I don't know if we might be able to open that up and get to it in our Q&A section. And Megan, your question around not being sure if someone recognizes severity, how they're being abused. I would empower y'all to when rapport is established and if it's within your role, to kind of share some of these resources and have transparency around this is what we this is how we define domestic violence or intimate partner violence. This is how we define an imbalance of power and control when these mechanisms are being used. Are you seeing this in your relationship? What's coming up for you in thinking about how that may be showing up? So that insight can take time, and also in acknowledging readiness and willingness to leave a situation. So I think that idea of like, no matter how long it takes, continuing to stay open and explore with the person that you're serving, the family that you're serving.
Yeah. And again, being mindful not to try to push that recognition on the survivor, because, denial is part of a whole nother cycle that, happens to everybody. So you want to be careful of that too, that you're not, the more that with some people, the more that you push to try to show them that, yes, you are in an abusive relationship, the more that they're going to push that denial and they're going to refuse to see it. So just be careful with that and, give them resources and things like that, like Nicole had said.
I appreciate that. The pushing is a delicate, psychoeducation, transparency around some of the terminology, but not forcing any, well, this is what it is on them, right? Like not telling them what it is because they're defining it. They're the experts of their situation. So amazing. I'm loving all the comments coming in. Thank you all so much. I want to move on in the interest of time. We have an activity planned next. So let's get to that. I'll throw it to Carrie Ann.
Yeah, so we're kind of breaking this up with a couple of activities to do. So we'd like to know when you are not feeling great, if you are hurting emotionally, physically, you're in pain, how do you like to be treated? What do you want from other people? What do you need? Gabby wants to be left alone.
I went there too,
Yep.
right away. I was like, I need space. Yep.
Crystal, space and understanding, space. I tend to ask for space, but don't want it. That's me. I go to my room and then I get mad when nobody comes in.
Got Kevin saying with care and respect,
Empathy, love that.
company for support, compassion, listening, not advice. This is
Yes, that's
huge,
key.
y'all. Yes.
Mental space.
Chris says left alone or let me vent, right? So it's like, yeah, exactly. And you kind of know who to go to, right? And depending on what it is, you know who to go to for that, that space.
So let me know that you are standing by me and if I need anything. That's great.
Respectful sensitivity, Kim. Thank you for that. I love that
An
comment.
ear and a hug. I love that. Space for emotions, validation, and some helpful resources that are easy first steps without judgment. Without judgment. I love that. So important.
I want to be alone, but would like someone to check on me. Yeah.
Jessica wants sleep. Yes, when we're hurting emotionally, it's exhausting, right? Absolutely.
Amazing. You all are so generous with your commentary. We really appreciate everything you're chatting in. Yoga, body tapping, art, coloring. Erica, thank you for those suggestions too, right? Like other strategies to work through what is hurting or is causing pain, other outlets.
Yeah.
Rest, space to rest. Yeah, we need rest.
Don't tell me what I should do next. I hear that. Love it. Wow, these are amazing. There's so many I can't keep up.
No, I know. I'm like, I can't scroll through. Thank you all so much. Take note. I mean, there's a lot of themes here, right? Respecting yourself, knowing you need space, knowing you maybe need to go to that one person or a couple people that, you know, can just hold it and hear you vent, and other strategies like, you know, other expressions of working through the pain, working through the hurt, like yoga or body tapping. Excellent. Okay. All right. What do you think, Carrie Ann? Should we keep it moving?
Let's keep moving.
Okay, we got a lot, y'all, so we're gonna keep flying. All right. So this touches on a lot of what we were just talking to in terms of respect. You know, how do we show respect? We need to be grounded in empathy. We can believe a survivor and hold their truth when we are really rooted in an empathic approach. We want to acknowledge there is a lot of stigma. We saw some comments come through earlier that I didn't get to address, but there's stigma around domestic violence and how that silences survivors and discourages seeking help. There's all kinds of systems and institutions that do not make seeking help or seeking support, seeking safety easy or safe. I mean, just seeking shelter in and of itself is a very arduous process. And even though New York City, where I am located, it's a right to shelter city, it still can be very challenging and seemingly impossible to get a placement that is safe for your family and acceptable for your family. So we want to acknowledge and hold, you know, space for the stigma that is there, on top of just acknowledging that if you're in a situation of domestic violence or intimate partner violence, what kind of emotions and feelings and stories does that bring up, and your identity and who you are as a survivor. So it makes it really hard for survivors to come forward. We want to emphasize that coming from a place of empathy can help encourage a survivor feel safe in sharing their experience and enforce that they can ask for help from others in the future. So even if they come to you once and you're able to, and you have only one opportunity to interact with this survivor, this family, and they're able to share with you that they're in the situation, and you can provide the holding environment, you can just hold the space for them to tell you what's going on. You can, within the role of, you know, the responsibilities of your role, provide the resources or the recommendations or interventions that are appropriate. That can help reinforce that it's safe and it's okay to disclose and to share that you're in this situation. We want to encourage that we try to discuss concerns of safety from a place of respectful curiosity. Someone mentioned respectful sensitivity in how we like to be treated when we're hurting or in pain. And this, I think, mirror images that really nicely of, we want to be curious, we want to learn more, but we want to do so gently. And as Carrie Ann was saying earlier, not forcing anyone to be on the same page about how we're assessing the situation. We want to understand their opinion of the situation first, so we can really root ourselves in their perspective and what their needs are and how we can help prioritize that along with safety. And we want to mention that someone sharing their story with you is an invitation for you to explore, an invitation to operate with empathy and ask questions about how and what they need from you. So we want to encourage you to walk through the door with empathy and try to, keep that as the center focus in understanding and exploring. To bring that to life a little bit, I'm going to move to the next slide, and Carrie Ann, you're going to introduce.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just say before we play this video that I encourage you to walk through the door, not run. So if somebody starts opening up to you about their situation, it may be somebody who you have noticed this about, thinking back to that comment about how do we get people to open up their eyes that they are in a situation that is abusive. So if they are opening up to you, be gentle. Just walk with them. Don't run or force that conversation to go farther than what they are comfortable with. Take their leads and what they are saying. So we are going to play this video on sympathy versus empathy. Some people may have seen this before. It is it's just real quick 3-minute video. Oh, and Vanessa, there's the sound. Okay.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So I absolutely love this video. It's a great way to put it into perspective and use a little bit of humor in that, right? So I love the at least character and the silver lining it. And we all do that, right? I mean, that's what we want to do. And from our last activity, we heard from a lot of you that what you really need and what you want to feel supported is to be listened to, but not have the fixing it. And so when we use at least, we're minimizing what the person is saying. And that is not what any of us want. And, I think everybody can relate to the silver lining and think back and where they've been guilty of it, because I think just about everybody has at some point in their life. I know I certainly have. And I try actively now to omit that from my vocabulary, at least just does not exist anymore as much as I possibly can. And if I do slip up and do that, I try to correct myself. But I thought it was super powerful in that video when the supporting person said, I don't even know what to say. How many people think to a time when they are really hurting and need somebody to listen to them? How many times, if that person said to you, I'm not sure what to say. Wow, that's a lot. How good would that feel? I think saying it doesn't feel good, but hearing it feels amazing. And that's what we need to remember when we are working with people in these situations, that it's okay not to know what to say. And it's okay to say, I'm not sure what to say right now, and just be there physically with them and just sit in silence. Silence is so powerful. It's a very powerful tool that most people are very uncomfortable with.
I wanted to jump in there with some comments too, Carrie Ann, that we're getting chatted in. Really positive feedback on sharing this. I'm so glad. Some people are familiar with it, it sounds like, but it's new to some others. I want to raise up Giannina's comment. Sorry if I mispronounced your name, but she said to the hosts and panelists, listen to definitely, but many times DV clients are also victimized by others who are supposed to help them, such as CPS and the courts.
Absolutely.
And 100% accurate. And this is part of the stigma, right? That also not only just concrete institutional barriers and further harm that does take place. And this is why when we have the opportunity to counteract those kinds of patterns and those trends and the other ways harm is done, we can hopefully foster a different experience of support for the survivors that we're lucky enough to come forward to us and ask for just a holding environment, just to be acknowledged and validated that their situation is very, very hard, even if we don't know what to do next. So
yeah, and somebody going through something like that, and they are victimized by other people who should be supporting them, it can reinforce that denial within the survivor, or even bring it back into light, because they may think, okay, maybe I am blowing this out of proportion. Maybe what I think is happening isn't really happening. Maybe this is normal for most partners, those types of things. It just really reinforces or even returns that denial, which is, not healthy, because in order for people to leave these situations, that acceptance needs to be true and strong and grounded.
And I think I saw a comment earlier too. There's a lot coming in. So thank you, everyone. Keep them coming. As someone said, guilty of silver lining. I think empathy is a muscle we all have to practice. I think it's something I wish we had more foundational classes in like elementary school, kindergarten about what is empathy? How do we practice empathy? It's something we have to work at. So no, I want to encourage us not to be guilty or, further any kind of shame about what has happened, but just be aware of different ways to engage and offer and hold that space, so we can all kind of move forward with more of an empathic approach with working with everyone. But bringing it back to DV, and we've got a lot of comments here, so I want to thank you again for keeping them coming. What do you think, Carrie Ann? Should we move on to our next topic?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, let's keep going so we don't run out of time.
No, I'm afraid of that. Okay, so beware of your biases. So sometimes our own perspectives, our own experiences, our own identities get in the way of us fully being able to empathize and understand another person's experience. It's okay. It's part of our human experience. We're going to have our specific experiences that make it impossible to fully understand someone else's. But I think it's important that we never assume anything about anyone else's experience. And that's where that kind of curious exploration respectful sensitivity, that's where we want to avoid assuming anything and really ask questions, ask for more information, and not think that our experience of any similar situation is what the other person or who we're serving is navigating and identical in any way. Bias can look like lots of different intersections of our identities. So you may share identities with the survivor you're supporting, such as race, cultural background, gender, biological sex, sexual orientation, geographical location, level of education, profession, religion, disability, ability, or socioeconomic status. We need to make sure we respect the survivor's unique experience as their own. And I want to emphasize again, I'm seeing some chats in about men being able to come forward as survivors and how stigmatized that is for men versus women being identified as survivors. We want to really challenge the assumption around gender norms in dynamics of DV, and that all abusers are not men and all survivors are not women. So really wanting to raise that again and put words to that, that kind of assumption that exists out there, and that can influence how we engage with a survivor who comes forward based on their gender or biological sex. So with that, we have another chat in activity, and I'll throw it to Carrie Ann.
Yeah, so our next activity is there a bias that you have had to address to be able to move forward in a non-judgmental space? This is a tough question, I know. So if we think of Janet, maybe Janet is living in a beautiful home. She has a very high profile professional job. Maybe her husband is somebody who is very prominent in the community, and they have, from the outside looking in, they have this perfect family. We might have a bias of that leads us to, I'm not believing that she is in a situation where she feels like she needs to leave, because she has, from the outside, we're not seeing that, and a lot of times that's very true, especially with families who seem like they're very well off. Their social economic status is on the higher end. They're prominent in the community. So we're getting a couple things.
I can read out Joanna's comments. So
Yeah.
she said, when doing family therapy and one of the individuals has a past history of DV, it is hard not to be judgmental or feel that they're hiding something at times. I'm thankful to have a supervisor who will walk through these feelings with me. Amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Joanna. And I think that's such a great illustration of how to work through these feelings that do come up, because they're going to come up. We're not robots. We all have these, individual identities that influence how we perceive those around us and assumptions we make about people around us. And so going to your supervisor, talking through the feelings and thoughts that are coming up for you is a fantastic way to work through what biases are coming up that could influence how you interact and how you support a survivor.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Carrie Ann.
Joanna, Atlas said potential bias is emotional or psychological abuse is not as serious or dangerous as physical abuse. Absolutely. So back when we were talking about taking on average 7 to 12 times to be able to leave, and that the 2-year period around leaving is the most dangerous, this applies not just to abuse that was physical during the relationship, but emotional and physical. If there was no physical abuse and somebody goes to leave, that physical abuse may manifest itself, and it may show up after the fact within those 2 years or even beyond. So yes, physical, emotional, psychological, all the kinds of abuses are just as dangerous as physical abuse. Absolutely.
Absolutely. I want to raise up Jessica.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
The assumption of the perpetrator is always the man, and being judgmental, working with both. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And someone mentioned substance use, thoughts or feelings we have about folks that use substances and various reasons that comes up, and a victim tongue being twisted. Sorry, y'all. Victim survivor and being addicted, and perpetrator being the dealer, that kind of level of complex and adding even more nuance to why leaving could be that much harder with that additional intersection of a relationship. So thanks, Jessica, for reaching out on that one.
Yeah, we have a bias of not letting my opinion of the abuser stop me from giving them the best counseling I can. Absolutely.
And that's exactly why we need to talk about it, because that's what we want to make sure we're checking at the door.
Yeah, I have to challenge myself when I have clients who are at risk for losing their parental rights if they continue the cycle. Yes.
Yeah, and Serenity mentions not being sure this is a bias, but fear that you as a provider are making things worse and then will not even leave after your help. So yeah, this idea of like your expert, you being an expert professional in the role, I'm putting that in quotes because we all know we're not the experts. The person in the situation is the expert of their situation, and being cautious of your role and influence and not wanting to exacerbate things. I think that kind of comes at play with bias and just the concern and considerations you want to make about doing the best job you can in supporting a survivor. So I think that can influence your ability to intervene, and definitely worth talking about in supervision with your team.
Chris talks about mutually abusive situations, which absolutely do happen quite often, and trying not to be judgmental for both parties can be challenging. I agree. Yeah, these are great.
Thank you all so much.
Yes. Okay, do we want to move on to our first self-care break?
Yes, please. All right.
I think we need it.
We have moved through a lot of content here, lots of big theoretical ideas. We want to model and reinforce that in this work, we really have to take care of ourselves and sustain it to be able to keep doing the work. And so we wanted to not just talk about self-care, but give you guys a moment, give you a few minutes to actually practice some self-care. So I'm going to read a body scan activity that I pulled from Therapist Aid. I hope y'all are familiar with that as a really helpful resource of not just for therapists, lots of different kinds of interventions and info sheets and psychoeducation. I'm going to read through this. I encourage y'all to sit comfortably with your eyes closed or focus gently on a stationary object in your space with your arms relaxed beside you or resting on your legs. And if you are not inclined to wanting to do a body scan based on where you are, feel free to use these next couple minutes however you see fit for yourself. I'm going to turn off camera so I can also unplug for a bit, and I will start reading in just a second. Over the next several minutes, you will focus on the physical sensations throughout your body. These sensations might be the feeling of clothes on your skin, tension within your muscles, the temperature of the air, or anything else you can feel. Sometimes you might not notice any sensation at all. Your job is to simply observe these sensations. You do not need to change how your body feels or do anything else. To begin, sit back or lie down in a comfortable position. Close your eyes if you're comfortable doing so, or let your gaze soften. Take a few deep breaths. Notice the feelings all throughout your feet, including your sole, heel, toes, and top of the foot. Notice the sensation of the ground, your shoes, and anything else you can detect. Travel up your body, noticing the sensations in your ankles, shins, and calves. Notice sensations both deep in the muscles and on the surface of your skin. Continue noticing the feelings in your legs as you move up to your knees and thighs. Notice how your clothing feels against your skin. Continue moving up your body, taking note of the feelings in your hips and backside. Simply notice the feelings without any need to change them. Pay attention to the feelings in your lower back and abdomen. Notice how your body feels against the surface on which you are sitting or lying down if you chose to do so. For a few moments, pay attention to your breathing. Notice how your abdomen raises when you breathe in deeply and falls when you exhale. Experience the sensations in your upper back and chest. Notice the feeling of clothing on your body. Now, notice the feelings in your hands, fingers, and wrists. Notice the sensations in your forearms, upper arms, and shoulders. Pay attention to the feelings in your neck and throat. Notice the feelings in your face and head. Attend to every feature in your face, one by one. Finally, slowly scan your entire body, noticing all the sensation from your toes to the top of your head. For a final time, pay attention to your breathing. Notice how your abdomen rises when you breathe in deeply and falls when you exhale. The body scan exercise is coming to a close. At your own pace, allow your eyes to open or refocus on the screen in front of you. This concludes the body scan. Give folks a couple seconds to come back. Absolutely, Joanna, very welcome. All right, we're going to revisit self-care a little later, but thanks for taking a few minutes, however you use that time to think about self-care.
Thank you, Nicole, for that. That was amazing. And I just want to say just real quickly, we're doing a couple self-care breaks within this because in the tool, you'll see that we touch base on the importance of doing self-care for yourself when you're working in this line of work, especially with domestic violence survivors, and because there's, compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma is so incredibly real, and it really is draining on you. So taking care of yourself so you can be there and show up for those people you're supporting.
Thank you for plugging that, Carrie Ann. And we chose the body scan as well, just because we know our bodies hold on to things that we can't always access cognitively or psychologically. So just checking in with where your shoulders are and where the fur of your brow is, it can be just grounding in and of itself. So thanks for that feedback.
Nicole just shared the body scan script to everybody, so everyone has that. I think it's wonderful.
All right, so we're going to transition now into another part of our conversation, and this can be, not any easier to talk about, but we want to make sure we really also focus on the impact that DV and IPV can have on children, and things you all can be on the lookout for when working with families and survivors on how things can manifest. I want to emphasize that this is not a one-size-fits-all. These are just generalized observations and research that points to what you can see, but it just provides more context of what y'all could expect in the field. But again, not a one-size-fits-all. Not all kids will show these kinds of these symptoms. So we want to emphasize that 1 in 15 children are exposed to intimate partner violence each year, and 90% of these children are eyewitnesses to this violence. And just to reinforce, intimate partner violence is not necessarily violence that happens in the home. It can just be between two partners that are intimate, and it could be, it could take place anywhere. So just thinking about that, the gravity of that statistic, 1 in 15 are actually exposed to it, and then 90% are eyewitnesses of actual intimate partner violence. When a child is exposed to domestic violence or intimate partner violence, they are more at risk of experiencing the following symptoms. And wanting to reinforce, we'll say this again on the next slide, this is not a one size fits all. You won't see all of these or necessarily any of these in all children who are witnessing or witness to this type of violence. So you might see insomnia, bedwetting, verbal, motor, or cognitive issues, learning difficulties, self-harm, aggressive and antisocial behaviors, depression, anxiety, and want to also just heighten up the statistic that there is a higher likelihood of child witnesses of domestic violence becoming adult perpetrators or adult victims in their later years. So there's a generational impact that we want to make sure we're raising up here as well.
Absolutely. So also, perpetrators of domestic violence or IPV may abuse children as part of their abuse of their intimate partner. So abusive partners may use the children to control victims. They often threaten to gain sole custody, to kill, to kidnap, or otherwise harm a child if the victim leaves. So that goes back to where that period of time right around leaving is super, dangerous. It's not just dangerous for the victim, it's dangerous for the children involved as well. And again, not all children will develop a traumatic response to symptoms. The frequency nor the severity of the domestic violence witness can predict how a child is going to respond.
I'm just noticing Catherine's comment. It's a tough balance of communicating this impact to the parent while holding space for the parent's own trauma and not causing further shame. It's such a delicate balance. And it's really, prioritizing safety first and foremost and protecting the most vulnerable in the situation, which are, children. It's having the least amount of autonomy and agency and making sure, it's a very delicate balance of providing that kind of psychoeducation and assessing for these kinds of, or exploring, maybe your role isn't to assess, but to explore, like, are these things coming up and are you getting the different kinds of help to really address the child's needs? It's a very delicate balance to explore and continue to hold that space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And our third part of this is emphasizing the mitigating and protective factors that can help decrease risk. As we said, not all kids are going to have these symptoms or demonstrate a likelihood of being a part of a domestic violence relationship or intimate partner violence relationship in adulthood, but and some of that reason is because of having these protective factors in place. So support of a trusted adult can be one of the most kind of corrective, mechanisms for a child, to have someone that they can go to and talk about what is going on with them, who they can open up to, kind of like when we were talking about if we're hurting or in pain, having someone we can go to vent to can be very, very protective and mitigate a lot of other risks for dealing with stress and being exposed to domestic violence or intimate partner violence. Showing successful social connection with their own peers, so not just with adults, but actually having other kids their own age that they can really connect to. We're social beings. We need to be with other people. We thrive, and our brain is wired to be around and connected to others. And that goes with all stages of development. Kids need to have that space and that connection as well. And it can be really, it can build confidence, it can build empowerment, it can build their own ability to advocate and have a voice in what's coming up for them when they have peers to practice and exercise those things with. having a reserve of self-esteem, having the trusted adults and the social connection with their peers can also help with just self-esteem reserves and their own vision and their own perception of themselves, and resilience being a very hot item to talk about the power of resilience and how that can really counteract, not only in DV and IPV situations, can really counteract risk and heightened likelihood of becoming a survivor or dealing with those in further years.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, oh, go ahead, carry on. Sorry, I was going to add a
No,
comment.
go ahead.
I was going to say, thinking about Janet, right? If we come back to Janet, this is the first time we're kind of shifting. We've been talking about families in general, but if we think about Janet's son, which now I've forgotten. James, thank you. I was blanked on his name for a second. What comes to mind when we think about like how we would have, how do we incorporate this in the work with Janet and James? How might some of this be explored? And if you're not sure, just wanted to throw that out there as something to think about. You've been working with Janet for years, or for months, I should say. James is coming with social challenge or school challenges, talking about how to support him by supporting her, and what kinds of concerns she might have about how he is doing, what kind of symptoms he might be experiencing or demonstrating that could point to the impact that the DV is having on him as his own person. So just some more food for thought about how this also wraps around to the children in the family and how they're witnessing and experiencing the DV or IPV.
So we're going to move along to talk about ways that we can support this parent or caregiver or survivor. And when we go through this, this is specifically towards family peer advocates. So if you're in another role, some of this may or may not be applicable to you. So this webinar and tool was developed specifically for family peer advocates. So I just want to mention that. So some ways that we can support this person is to be aware and know how to connect to resources that the family might need. So as FPAs, we are not, it's not in our scope of practice to address the specific issues of the parent or caregiver. However, as everybody knows, and we just talked about, DV and IPV definitely has an impact on the children, and those that is what we're there for. So it is within the scope of practice of an FPA to be able to connect that that parent to resources that is going to help them in this situation. Some resources that you may not think about are things like food and shelter, clothing, employment. If they're not working, if you don't have your own income coming in, it can be very, very difficult to be able to leave because of that financial strain. Mental and physical health care. A lot of times DV survivors are lacking in keeping up with their own mental health care as well as physical health care. And all of that is very important. So we definitely encourage everybody to be familiar with their local DV IPV resources. Do you have a shelter? Do you have specific therapists who work with, as a specialty around DV and IPV? Is there food shelters in your community? Are there, places where they can get clothing for free or very low cost? Helping maybe to find employment. Are there employment services that they can go to? Are they connected with a PCP or a primary care physician? Are they connected with therapists? Are they ready for that? With all of these things, being mindful that if that person is not ready for these things, again, not pressuring those supports, but having them readily available. So when they are wanted and needed and asked for, you have that information and you can help make those connection and resources. We do have some national and New York State resources available here on the screen and on our tool. There's more on our tool of New York State and national different ones, but I highly recommend that Google your county, your area, and keep a list somewhere readily available with resources of these types of things if needed.
All right, and then carrying on with that last slide, the idea of being ready to provide support around access to mental health and physical health. Wanted to emphasize that depending on a survivor's readiness to really accept that kind of health care, you do want to be ready and have places to refer or ideas of ways to connect and help them make that step. But wanted to emphasize that at times when a survivor is, managing multiple priorities, with safety of themselves and their children being one of them, probably the top one. Sometimes they're more ready and willing to look at mental health care treatment for their children before themselves. And so having ideas for connecting, and as a child therapist, I've seen this firsthand, being able to have a parent, a survivor, ready to connect their child because they can see there's, insomnia or anxiety or difficulty with like social connections at school. They're ready to get the support for their child, but maybe not ready for that space for themselves yet. And so respecting their prioritization and their journey in getting connected to that level of care in terms of mental health services. And then physical health, there is, because of the stigma around domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and because of many competing priorities that survivors are dealing with, they may not seek out their own physical health. And I think the same is true around prioritizing their children's health care before their own. We can often see that in action. And sometimes getting their children connected to PCP can be like one step closer to them having access to a doctor they develop trust and safety with, to be able to then potentially have, their own space to talk about their physical health and what they're managing. And I think it's really important to raise up the reality that TBIs, traumatic brain injuries, are significantly underdiagnosed in survivors because of the stigma, because of the tendency to push off and, kind of avoid seeking out physical health because of other priorities. And we wanted to emphasize that traumatic brain injuries can contribute to a decreased cognitive functioning and worsen traumatic response symptoms. So without that being ruled out, that medical component, it can blur what mental health, issues that they are managing. And so it's always really important to rule out physical health concerns before, and maybe in tandem with mental health, but that traumatic brain injuries are significantly underdiagnosed. So wanting to raise that here just to bring that to light. I'm wondering if people have any thoughts about hearing about these kind of concrete strategies, any initial reactions to anything we've shared so far? And okay, if you don't, we have time at the end for Q&A as well. But just encouraging more, if people want to share thoughts or reactions, don't hesitate. Okay, I'll throw it back to you, Carrie-Ann.
All right. Oop. Okay. So what happens if there's immediate danger? So this is something we definitely need to be mindful of. So family peer advocates are mandated reporters. So if a child is exposed to domestic violence, and you become aware of that, the threshold is being met for reporting to the state registry. So we provided the mandated reporter phone number for New York State, which is on the screen. It's 1-800-635-1522. Highly recommend that if you do not have that saved into your phone, that you do so. It's can be very handy. You never know when you're going to need it. And if you're, out in the community and you're working, you may not have time to, go back to the office and make that phone call, and you'll be able to do that right away. calling 911 if a survivor does disclose, or you have knowledge of imminent danger, that's an emergency. That's a call to 911 well before calling the mandated reporter. If you know that this family, this person, this child is in danger now, then I highly suggest, calling for emergency services. And always seek support from your supervisor, from your team with challenging situations. And really I would hate to feel that anybody is out there working and feeling like they are alone. Having that person that you can connect to get that support, to get that guidance that you definitely need.
Thanks so much for that, Carrie Ann. And I think the other piece of that, just to go back to the mandated reporting, actually thinking about some of the comments we received around the stigma and how some just concrete challenges that come up when other systems get involved, acknowledging that is a real, I could say so many words, it's a real challenge, right? To have another system come into a family and have to, perform their responsibility, and holding space for, we as mandated reporters have to fulfill that responsibility. And we can, I think, simultaneously acknowledge and validate the frustration or fear that might come up from a survivor, knowing that this report has to take place. In my practice, and I've trained many people in this as well, and I encourage, as much transparency around that to the extent that is safe for the child, as much as possible. So thinking about Janet, if she had disclosed that James had seen an act of violence, the night before, and we need to talk about his immediate safety and coming home to an unsafe situation, encouraging maybe a call together to the state central registry for them to receive that information, and for Janet to be privy to what is being disclosed, and for her voice to potentially be heard in that, to the extent that she feels comfortable, taking a role in that as well. I think that can be just a very unsettling for all parties involved, and it can also be empowering to have the survivor have a voice in what is happening and have another way for them to express and advocate for themselves. But a very challenging situation regardless.
Mhm.
Okay. I'm seeing some questions. How do you navigate safely report? Go ahead, Carrie Ann. Did you want to jump in there?
I didn't notice the question, so I'm glad that you said that. How do you navigate safely reporting? For example, there could be possible retaliation when a system becomes involved. Yeah. Very important question. I think in the case of imminent danger, there's no question about, the way to navigate, to negate that safety, or to handle the safety issue is the call for emergency responders. With mandated reporting, being transparent about it, I think, is having that conversation with the person you're supporting before you make that phone call is best practice. Explain, that you are a mandated reporter, that this is something that is serious enough that the phone call needs to be made, walking them through the why and the process that is going to take place. And in best case scenario, you have the full support of the survivor that you are supporting to make that phone call. And I've even made these calls with the parent with me, because I've had parents ask me, can you please call? Like, this is what's happening. I don't know what else to do. Can you please make that call? I know that you're a mandated reporter.
Yep.
Also very important for everybody who is mandated reporter is to disclose the fact that you are a mandated reporter right at the beginning of working with people, even maybe throughout. As you're working with them every so often, just, reminding, I am a mandated reporter, so that it doesn't become a situation where they're like, I told you that in confidence and I didn't know that you were going to do this. having the transparency and giving them that knowledge and update and reinforcing that knowledge throughout the time that you're working with them, I think is very imperative.
And I think naming when you do have to make a report, naming the dynamic that's at play. If you're witnessing intimate partner violence, if you're witnessing domestic violence, if the other parent is able to be present, the survivor is able to be present and define what they're experiencing, in a best case scenario, right, they're taking that into account in the investigation of the alleged, child maltreatment or neglect to be exposed to intimate partner or domestic violence. So I think being equipped to report out on what are the dynamics at play. This is not happening in a bubble. This is the pattern. This is the buildup. This is what we've been working on. And now this crisis moment has erupted and now we're faced with making a report. So I think being prepared to articulate that when making the report is very helpful in the investigation happening effectively and with that kind of nuance of sensitive engagement to the extent possible.
Absolutely. So if we think back to Janet, so now that we've gone through a lot of things, we've gone through our tool and we've given you some situations. Our hope is that at this point you would feel more prepared to be able to support Janet and James in their situation. Does anybody have any feedback or any comments or ideas of how they would support Janet? I see some things coming in, but let's see.
It is Lillian's comment about they accept the call. They are often the care servicers. It's also very hard when the abuser is in the home, right? And we know this also feeds into the shelter system of forcing survivors to make the move to leave rather than a perpetrator being removed, right? This is part of that, the limitations of the system that we're working within. Thank you for naming that, Lillian. And transparency being helpful from Catherine's perspective. Yeah, so we hope with thinking about Janet and some of the best practice, some of the baseline recommendations and considerations we've shared, you would have some maybe not new things you learned, but maybe reinforce things that you all are already doing, reinforcing that you're already doing the best work you possibly can, and maybe some new things you learned today around different strategies or different tools or different ways to frame things. And even maybe just how you're approaching the situation and being aware of your bias and how you're operating from a place of empathy. And Romary says, keeping your role in mind, yep, assess for safety and immediate needs, move toward Janet's goals and provide support resources around that. Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I could not be more succinct. That was lovely.
Yeah, and we have a connect with tangible resources. Let her lead how she wants to be supported. Absolutely.
Let the survivor lead.
Mm-hmm. Very important. And keep in mind that if a survivor says that they are ready for this step, and then the time comes to take that step and they retract that go with that. That is common. That's one of those 7 to 12 times where it takes a while, and it's I'm ready for this, and then something happens and no, I'm not ready for this anymore. And that can happen, and it can be frustrating for outsiders to see. It can even be frustrating for the survivor trying to take that step and getting frustrated with themselves. So be mindful of that and be empathetic to it, and try not to discourage them from ever trying to take that step again, because that can sometimes happen.
We didn't talk about safety planning here because it's beyond the scope of this kind of foundational conversation. But we did get safety plan kind of woven throughout many of your comments. And I think, so Albert commented to us, the hosts and panelists, about being aware of change talk, like being ready to act on change. And I think that's why having a safety plan and working with your team around what is Janet's safety plan? It's not a cookie cutter, one size fits all. And then She has various, steps to take depending on the situation. And also knowing that safety plans are flexible. Like, we have to be responsive, and Janet knows best around what's going to keep her safe and be the best possible outcome when she's ready. So I think being flexible, being empathetic, being responsive, and having being proactive around these conversations can set up a survivor to be supported and ready to act when they reach that point of readiness.
Absolutely. And even though safety planning is out of the scope of practice of family peer advocates, safety planning comes in all different forms. It doesn't have to be a formal safety plan. You can have that conversation with Janet about her and James's safety, and she can make those decisions as to what needs to happen to keep them safe. It doesn't need to be a formal safety plan. And I want to make it clear that I'm not saying that family peer advocates cannot talk about safety with parents and caregivers. That's definitely not what we're saying, but like a formal safety plan is out of the scope of practice.
Thanks, Carrie Ann, for raising that.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm noting we have 8 minutes left. We're going to be really respectful of everyone's time. We're probably gonna have time to come back to some more commentary, but I want to make sure we do go to our self-care break number 2, because self-care is so important. So yeah, I'll pass it. Is this me?
It is.
It's me. Okay, thanks, Carrie Ann. In the role of a family peer advocate, and in many of their other roles present here, you must also take care of yourself to continue showing up for those you are supporting. Bearing witness to other stories can contribute to compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, and burnout. Self-preservation is paramount in continuing in this field effectively, right? We want to take care of ourselves so we can keep showing up with a clear perspective and checking our bias and being fresh and ready to help as effectively as possible. So wondering, what can you all do daily in your work to practice self-care? This is not, self-care is not a bubble bath every day. That's not feasible. We all know we cannot take bubble baths every day. But self-care is not, it's not a one size fits all. It's not going to look the same every day. But it is a practice. It's something just like empathy we have to work at and build in, and it's going to ebb and flow. We're going to be better at it in some seasons than others. But we want to keep it centrally minded, centrally focused, so that we know it's something that will help us sustain. And so please chat in what you can do daily. This is a lofty ask. What can you do daily to practice self-care? For me, it is drinking enough water. I don't always do enough of it. Sometimes I replace a little bit too much coffee with water, but I'm trying to drink more water. And that's something I can do daily.
We have somebody that said prayer, so spiritual self-care, awesome. Understanding boundaries, positive affirmations, and guided meditations. Take a lunch break. I actually really love that. I struggle with that. I very rarely ever take lunch breaks, so that is awesome. Schedule it into your day. Take a happy moment like Starbucks Frappuccino.
Yes. Caramel, please. Caramel.
Yes. Yoga, physical exercise. Yep.
Boundaries. Yeah, someone else is saying boundaries around personal life. Turning off your work phone. Oh my gosh, don't check your email. If you can't, it's not always possible. We were respecting, but when possible, when you can unplug, when you can be intentional about not being dialed in. Sometimes you're on call. Sometimes you're running a DV shelter, right? I've been there, done that. But when possible, you can have off time, unplug. Yes. Let go of the guilt around using PTO. Yes, use your vacation time, use your personal time, call out when you're sick, take care of yourself so you can take care of others. Absolutely.
Somebody said that part of their weekly self-care is their supervision, which is allows them to talk about the impact of what their work is having on themselves. I absolutely love that. Being supported. Yeah,
and maybe the daily act is like building out your agenda so you're ready and prepared for supervision, right? I would do that of like, I've got a long bullet list. We're not going to get to everything, but at least when I have that protected space, I am ready to go with all things that I need support around.
Mm-hmm.
Group debriefing, Shelley says, family peer groups, family peer supervision. Love this. Yes, Erica. Thank you. Okay. All right, well, we want to make, we're winding down so quickly. Okay, we have 4 minutes. Thank you all for chatting in your self-care. Please keep these in mind in this work. It's so important that we practice this, not just write it down to do. It's a practice we have to keep building it.
Absolutely.
Our next plug, we want to just mention the CTAC resource. So another component of self-care is really looking at work wellness and resilience. And this is already an existing course that exists for family peer advocates. And I'm sure a lot is applicable to other professions. So it's, feel free to check it out if you think you'd be interested. It's a self-learning course that reviews work-related stress, concepts of compassion fatigue, burnout, and secondary trauma. It helps to help learners develop both personal and professional strategies for self-care that lower stress and ultimately increase satisfaction within their role. So feel free to check that out at our CTAC Self-Learning Center website. Right, we've got through, I think maybe while we're looking at Q&A, Diana, do you want to look at, should I plug the CTAC events? Because I know we're tight on time.
Sure, I can certainly do that. I do want to say that I just put in the chat box, but also when you log out of the webinar, you will have a survey that pops up. So if you could please just take the time to fill out that survey. The feedback definitely helps inform a lot of these offerings. So anything that you see, that you are seeing in terms of needs that you might have on the ground, on the field, by all means, please share that as well. I can also put in the link for the new tool that we have created. So you all should have received it as registrants to this offering. If not, I'm putting in the chat box at this time. But you can forward it, or you can also ask folks to go onto the CTAC website. On one of those tabs under tools, they can scroll down and they will see this particular tool for folks. So I do encourage you to do that. And on our next slide, I know there's a few resources. Let me see if I can move along. Yeah, our upcoming events. When children and adolescents do not go to school, terminology and assessment. So these are for folks, what we have been hearing similar to the comments around in real time as a consequence of COVID, obviously an increase in DV, but we're also seeing is an increase in children not going to school. So I do encourage you, whether or not you are in the schools or working with families, this webinar will really help to sort of figure out what's the function behind that school refusal of the child, because once you sort of are able to assess for that, you can certainly move that conversation, explore things a little bit more. And also in real time, unfortunately, we do have another offering that focuses on mass shootings. So understanding mass shootings, supporting youth, families, and the community through our collective lens. Both of these offerings are obviously free of charge. They are listed on our CTAC website, so you can certainly visit that to get more information. And I believe our contact information is on the next slide. So again, I do want to thank our presenters, Carrie Ann, Nicole, all of you have joined in today. I do want to thank you for your participation. I think that obviously makes the offering that much more real and informative and appreciated from all of you. So again, please visit our webpage for additional trainings. As a reminder, this webinar, the recording and the slides, as well as the tool, will also be available on our webpage in 2 to 3 business days. And if you have any questions, please reach out to us at ctac.info@nyu.edu. And with that, on behalf of our presenters, I do want to say thank you to you all and have a great rest of the week, everyone.